Mr. Wells.
Thank you. I think it's important for us to recognize all of us have our own housing budgets, our own, I'm a small business owner. I'm well aware of the challenges of cutting our budget, but we also want to keep it in perspective. With over $100 million budget, we're looking at a cut this year probably in the $6 or $7 million range. This is something that we can manage, and I would take the starting point being the city manager looking to each department to bring forward proposals in the neighborhood of about 15%, and then looking to prioritize those cuts where they have the least impact on city services and key features like public safety and health. I do think that we need to consider seriously an opportunity to broaden the tax base for the fire assessment. And I think what we've said and certainly referred to here, that the university does not contribute equally to the fire services that it receives, and neither do many tax-exempt entities in our community. That's a service that all of us benefit from, and I think it's something we should consider more fairly spreading throughout the community. Finally, I do believe that we need to look to our city staff, and I think we need to find ways to incentivize them. They have many of these ideas of how they can do their jobs better, more efficiently, and we're not always very good at getting those proposals and getting them brought forward. I think we need to find ways to incentivize our staff to do a better job at what they're doing. They know it because they're where the rubber meets the road.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Sweet.
Thank you very much. I would support all service delivery and management efficiencies that can be shown to immediately reduce costs without increasing the cost to the taxpayers who pay that bill. I believe that another way to find those funds is to suspend the tax increment financing districts and their new construction projects, and instead shift those funds back to the general fund to pay for critical public services like police, fire, emergency management, and codes enforcement. And then finally, I would look to collaborate with my former colleagues in county government to conduct bulk purchase of fuel and bulk purchase of supplies. It is past time for significant across-the-street collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Wheat. Mr. Alley.
Yes, thank you. I think this is the biggest thing that we face. I'm glad it's the first question. We do have a budget shortfall. I think when you look back over the situation, which you'll see, I mean, if you go back to the 2007 budget, rather, the 2007, just a few years ago, it came in at approximately $92.2 million. And this fiscal year's budget is going to be about $100 million. And when you look at what was going on in the city in 2007 and what was going on in the city this next year, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that we couldn't live within our 2007 budget. So somehow, when times were good, we figured out how to grow the government. And now that times are hard, we're not ready to shrink it. We're looking at, we hear a lot about how we're going to raise revenue by increasing taxes. And I think everyone who's facing hard times right now is making hard decisions, and we have to too. I'm not particularly in favor of across-the-board cuts because I think it implies that all of the programs are equal then, that we can give up areas that we absolutely need, like basic services like our police department, in the same proportion that we may be able to cut back in areas that we may not need as much. You hear a lot about it on the campaign trail, but like the communications office, for example. So I think there are smart cuts to be made. The cuts will have to be made. I don't believe that you can make them in law enforcement. I don't think you can take police off the road. I think that's a terrible place to make cuts. I don't think you can raise taxes in terms of an assessment. Primarily because I think you're taking monies that you should have budgeted and dealt with more properly, and you're simply moving them to another location.
Thank you, Mr. Alley. Now we will move on to question number 2, which we will begin with Mr. Sperling. Unification of some city and county services has been on the table for many years. What are your thoughts on unification? Mr. Sperling.
in general, especially in these tough budgetary and economic times, I'm against most forms of unification. One, because it probably won't be true unification. You may see Gainesville operations and Alachua County operations unified, but we may have trouble getting smaller cities, et cetera. So what you'll just end up with is confusion. You'll have a unified system here, and then you'll see some small outlying community not being within that unification. Also, government has a tendency to, when it grows, or when something doubles, the amount of bureaucracy seems to quadruple, or some other similar thing like that. So I think unification will in fact just create more bureaucracy, because let's say, for instance, they decide, let's unify the Gainesville Police Department and the Sheriff's Office. You'll then have to have numerous committees created to oversee the unification of the Gainesville Police and Sheriff's Office, and those committees who are going to be employing more and more people, well, those people aren't going to want to give up their jobs. So they're going to try to find a way to stay on, and you're just going to have more and more bureaucracy, which will cost more and more money, all the while running up our deficit. So really, I just don't see any reason why. I just don't see any reason at this point to promote unification. Also, you lose home rule in the sense of, right now, if there's a problem in the police department or in any other organization, I'm just using the police, we have, I think, a very fine police department. I'm just using them as an example because it comes to mind quickly. The city commission and the local population has much better ability to deal with it, as opposed to if it ends up in the county, where you're going to have the county commission, which is much more, oversees a much larger area, and thus a lot more constituents, and you're going to have, again, possible confusion of who's overseeing what, who answers to who, does the GPD answer to the sheriff's office, etc. And so, again, I just don't see it as a sound idea at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sperling. Mr. Wells.
Thank you. This is something I've given quite a bit of thought to, and I think it's tempting to see great economy of scale by just simply combining entire departments, for example, the sheriff and the police department. But I think what we find is that we may lose track of the fact that we have very different levels of service in the city versus the more rural parts of our county. And we're not necessarily going to want to be in favor of just simply either accepting much lower levels of service in the city, for example, in police or fire protection, or alternatively providing much higher levels of service, which just encourages further population growth in rural areas. If you look at our GFR, our fire rescue, for example, we already have a lot of collaboration between the city and the county. And actually, the city services, when they go out and provide services for the county, charge less than the equivalent when the county comes and provides services to us, which kind of runs counter to what we might have expected when the county originally set up their fire rescue services on their own. However, there are cases where I think services can be done. We do a very good job with communications being shared between the city and the county. I think the helicopter unit could be an opportunity for a very significant savings. Why do we need to really have separate helicopter units for the city and the county? So again, I think it's about selectively looking at these and evaluating them strictly for their economic and also their environmental and their social benefits, and making sure that we're serving our citizens well in the process.
Ms. Wheat.
Thank you. There are a host of intergovernmental contracts and ways in which both the City of Gainesville and Alachua County currently share services between them, or one provides service for the other at some small cost. The issue is not so much unification of large services, as has been mentioned. The last data we have from 2002 showed that combining both fire departments would cost several $1 million up front at least, and would show no savings for at least 20 years. So I believe that there is the opportunity for us to collaborate in smaller ways through purchasing fuel, which does not require millions of dollars to implement, but requires a key card so that when you swipe it, the gas charge goes to the correct government and the correct department. And although we may share services now, we can do a much better job in purchasing and also in the scope of services of contracts that we may both put on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wheat.